everyone, this is my channel and let's talk about Anastasia. So this is part 2 of the series for my Anastasia coronation gown. I went over the backgrounds of everything in part 1, which is the Anastasia corset, and now I get to work on the pretty stuff, mainly the bodice. So without further ado, let's do this thing. First things first, I've got to actually draft the pattern. One of these days, I'll actually get a good enough setup that you can see what I'm doing. But for now, I'll just tell you, I'm using the Keystone System, a textbook on cutting and designing ladies' garments. That is the whole title. I didn't just make that up. It steps you through a Victorian bodice from measurements to pattern. There's even several alterations later on in the book that shows you how to fix fit issues, like the bust being too big, which is definitely a problem I regularly have to contend with, so I went ahead and did that alteration before ever trying it on. Big mistake. Big. Alright, so, Luthien, you're in the way. So it's June 22nd? It's June 22nd, and I just completed the first mock-up for the Anastasia dress. I'm actually just really making a Victorian bodice block so that I can alter it for the Anastasia dress, because the Anastasia dress is going to have a much lower neck. But I like Victorian outfits, so I figured I'd make a Victorian bodice block using a historical drafting method. And I'm surprised by actually how well it fits and how good it looks. I was entirely confused the entire time I was doing this drafting method. So, surprisingly, it turned out pretty well. I lost Luthien and now I have Estelle. Hello, sir. The only thing that is an issue at this point is the over bust area, from my over bust up to my shoulders. It is way too big. So you can see this is the line that's supposed to be the center front, and this is what I've lowered it down to. The other issue is right now I have my shoulders back, which I think is actually how the Victorian people usually had their shoulders, but as a person, I usually sit with my shoulders a little farther forward. So you can see there's some wrinkling here, and I'm not really sure how to fix that. I have a book that is supposed to help you with alterations, and I'm gonna have to go look for it, because I think that's what I'm gonna need to do this alteration. I'm also not sure if this is the... You're in the way, cat. You're making it blurry. I'm also not sure if this is the correct way. If this is the correct way. He's watching my hand move, and the camera keeps trying to focus on him instead of me. There we go. If this is the correct way to alter the center front. So, because right now, the other thing is now the collar is a lot more stiff. It's not as round as it should be, because I just tightened this part. I think it's probably fine. I just can open up the collar a little bit. But for now, the only thing I'm really concerned about is this. The other thing I noticed, which was a little surprising, is the shoulders are a lot farther down. I think that was a thing in the Victorian time. I think they had the lower shoulders, because if you look at a lot of the dresses that had like Berthas on them, that were a lower cut, they were often kind of on the edge of the shoulder, and they looked like they were actually going onto the arms. So that is what the Anastasia dress is gonna do, which is another reason why I really need to fix this issue, because I can't have that falling down all the time, especially with the sleeves that are gonna come off of it. But I'm really happy with the waist, and the back looks pretty good too. And the bust is actually really nice, which I'm surprised about. I was expecting to have to do alterations on the bust, but nope. So I just gotta figure out how to fix the wings in the front here. All right, so it is day 3 of the mock-up. I have added in some darts around the shoulder to take in this. I've also taken in the center front seam. I'm still getting some weird wrinkling around the armhole, but honestly, at this point, I'm just done with it, and I'm gonna just say, c'est la vie, and move on. So I actually wound up having to ask for help on a Victorian Facebook sewing group. One person on there said that my armhole wasn't the correct shape, and once I took their advice, it was mostly fixed. At least well enough that I was willing to move on. I also had to completely undo the big bust alteration that I had made in the beginning, so that was fun. Then I decided to go ahead and add the neckline that I'll need for Anastasia and try a mock-up with that, which I then proceeded to entirely forget to show you what that looks like. Okay, so I was getting ready to cut out the fabric for my bodice when I realized I should probably show the fabric. So this is the fabric that I got. This is the wrong side of the fabric, and this is the right side of the fabric. Normally I prefer a more dull texture. I don't really like having this satin look, but I think in this case I'm gonna go with the satin. This is from Joann's. It is Casa Crust Satin Gold. It is 100% polyester because I can't afford anything nicer. I really like this one. I also got fabric for the sleeves that is the same color, but I realized that I mixed up the Once Upon a December sleeves with the court gown sleeves. So I'm gonna have to go back to the store and get a different fabric for the sleeves. But at least I have the bodice, which is what I'm working on right now, and now I can move on to that part. Here I am, cutting out all the pattern pieces, none the wiser that I have unfortunately made a terrible mistake. You see that full front panel there? You see how I cut it out as one full piece? Yeah, turns out there's a different color panel in the front of Anastasia's bodice. So I sewed the darts together, then the pieces, never knowing this seemingly innocuous step would lead to a pain in the butt later. Unfortunately, I was gonna do both the outer layer and the inner layer of the bodice today, but I was looking at the pink fabric that I was planning on using for the skirt, and I don't know that I have enough. I have like 5 yards of it, and I was gonna use it for the lining because I thought I had like 10 yards of it, but no. So I don't have lining fabric because I don't have that fabric to use for lining, and also I don't know if I can use it for the skirt because I'm gonna need it for both the skirt and the sleeves. And I looked it up online, and a lot of the skirts, the historical skirts, were like 5 to 6 yards long. And sorry if you hear popping in the background, there's fireworks going on. But anyway, there was 5 to 6 yards for each skirt, and since I have 5 yards, I do have enough for possibly a skirt, but the sleeves are probably gonna be at least a yard. Like, I'll probably need at least a yard for the sleeves, so I can't take a yard for the sleeves and still have the 5 yards that I need for the skirt. I might be able to make it work, but I don't know. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause for today and then go to Joann's tomorrow and see if they have any more of that fabric, because I did get that one from Joann's as well. It's the same pink fabric as I used on the corset. I don't actually know what it is though. So I will go to Joann's and see if they have that fabric, hopefully. If not, see if they have something else that'll work. I also think I'm gonna go ahead and look into getting the trims that I want for the fabric, for the bodice, and possibly at least look into what kind of appliques they have for me to use on top of the bodice. And then hopefully I'll be able to cut out and sew the base layer and then attach the boning and all of that extra stuff that I gotta do. We shall see how that goes. I went to the store and they had the exact fabric I needed, so I went ahead and made the lining out of the pink as originally planned. Then I cut all of the seams down and sewed a little bit of binding tape over the straight seams to make boning channels. Even though I'll be wearing a corset underneath, the bodice should at least have some structure in its life. Okay, so I have 2 full layers. This is the fashion layer, and that's the outside. And then I also have the inner layer, which has my boning channels sewn in. They are completed, and I was going to attach them together so it would look like so, but I realized that one of the points of the lining is to hide the seams. So if I attach it together before I put the final seams in, which would be the sleeves, then that wouldn't be hidden, which would defeat the purpose. So I think what I'm gonna do now is actually switch over to the sleeves. I wanted to finish the bodice before I worked on the sleeves, but I think it'd be best for me to actually switch over to the sleeves and cut them out and be able to sew them into this project, and then I can attach the lining once the sleeves are in. So in general, I'm pretty loath to use an actual pattern, mainly because I can't figure out how to correct them to my size, because I'm not the pattern size that they have on all these patterns. I have to adjust them every time and I cannot figure it out. So I struggle through drafting stuff on my own, and I don't like using patterns. However, I do have a full box of patterns that I look through and go, maybe eventually I'll make that. And one of them is this pattern right here, which has the perfect sleeves. I mean, they are a little long, so I'll probably shorten them a little bit. Don't look at my face, look at my... But I think they're the perfect shape for the dress. And the nice thing, if you can see, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see, let's see. If you look, don't look at her face, look at the sleeve. There we go. If you look here, you can see that the sleeve is gathered, which means it doesn't have to exactly fit to the armhole, which is the main thing about sleeves that you have to worry about, especially ones that are open like this and don't actually have to connect to your arm. This is gonna be the pattern that I used. I also have already made this pattern of the sleeves for my first ever cosplay, which was Arwen's battle dress, which looked nothing like it should have. It was very much not the correct pattern that I used at the time, but this is the pattern that I used, and I will use it for the sleeves for that and for this as well. So I did wind up deciding to make the sleeves slightly shorter than the pattern. It was easy enough to do. I just folded the pattern along the folds that were already there in 2 different places. Then just kind of sketched around the jagged parts to even it out. Once I've drawn out my pieces, I used a whole bunch of transfer paper to get it onto the other side of fabric. I started with the lining layer because I plan to do a bubbly lining. I'm not really sure what it's called. I think it's called bubble lining. That means the pink layer has to be a little bit smaller than the fashion layer. Therefore, I could just use the lining layer as a guide and make the fashion layer slightly bigger. Then I cut it out. Then sew them all together, pink the seams, and actually iron the fabric. Then pleat the sleeves along their edges because there's no way this big thing is fitting in the bodice otherwise. I wound up kind of guesstimating where exactly to put them because I didn't think that the pattern worked for my project, but I feel like it actually would have been better if I had followed the pattern. Another pro tip, Because of the pleating, it made the armhole smaller, so I should have taken that into account when making the bodice. Well, looks like I've just realized my terrible mistake, but it's too late now for a mock-up. I'm sure I can just wing it and it'll look absolutely fine. So I used the dart as a guide and took the seam at a curve to the top of my pattern, which of course means I have to also take out this tiny dart on the actual bodice, being very careful not to damage it. I cut the front panel out of the same fabric I used for the sleeves and sewed it to the bodice, and then, with much trepidation, I cut off the excess from both pieces. It's fine! There's nothing to worry about! Not at all! It's not like the lining layer is now a different size than the fashion layer. No, not at all. Speaking of the lining, I know for a fact that I'm going to have to sew the sleeves of the lining by hand, so before I even think about attaching it to the fashion layer, I'm gonna prep that by cutting the allowances short and ironing them over. Then I need some bones. Just like with my corset, I decided to go cheap this time around and just use some zip ties, cut and filed to shape. Then I sewed the lining to the fashion layer on the bottom only, flipped them right sides out, and pinned the sleeves in place. I very much did not want this stitch to be visible, so I wound up using, I think it's called a ladder stitch. It's commonly used to close pillows by taking only the inside layer of them both and pulling the string taut. At the last minute, I have made a terrible mistake. I was thinking about how I wanted to do the pink sparkly and gold sparkly detail that's in the front of the coronation gown. And of course I looked up all of the different versions of the dress that people have done. People have put lace in there, some people have put jewels in there in the pink section, and they were all very pretty, but they just didn't feel right for me. And I was looking at the gowns, the Tsarina Court gowns, and none of them really had anything like that. They didn't have jewels, they didn't have lace or anything like that. The only detail that was added on to these court gowns was embroidery. I, of course, do not own an embroidery machine. That is way beyond my budget. So, how else am I gonna get embroidery than to hand embroider everything? I've been cross-stitching since I was a kid. How bad can hand embroidery be? So on the front panel pieces, I drew out a blooming rose surrounded by vines and decorated with some leaves based off some references I found on Google. Then I traced the pattern onto some stitch and tear stabilizer that I happened to already have in my possession. I started with the stem just to make sure everything stays in place, since it's the only thing that spans the entire piece. For that, I thought I would make my life more difficult and make it out of a looped ribbon that I sewed down. No, never mind the extra time that was going to cost me. Then for the flower, I chose a color that was pretty close to the inside sleeve and created each petal using a padded satin stitch, which is really just a satin stitch layered over another and so on. The smaller petals only got one layer, but the larger ones at the bottom actually got 4. I really don't know if that actually made a difference. I think it did. I hope it did, because otherwise it'd be worthless. Apparently I forgot to film it, but the leaves were also done with a satin stitch, and then a stem stitch was added to the leaf's veins, just to give that little bit of detail. And then I decided that the rose actually wasn't sparkly enough, because the design clearly sparkles in the movies. So I decided to add some pink seed beads to make it look like there were dewdrops on the roses. And finally, I can remove the stabilizer. If you're planning on doing hand embroidery though, I would suggest you use the kind that dissolves in water, because there were several spots that the thread pulled out when trying to remove it, and there are other places where it's still slightly visible because I wasn't able to remove it. Now that the embroidery is done, I can finish attaching the lining, which will also cover up the back side of the embroidery. I sewed the center fronts of both the lining and the fashion layers. Then I flipped them right side out. I think I should have put some sort of stiffening bit at the front to stabilize the closure, but it's too late now. I couldn't quite find a good picture of how the Tsarina Court Gowns were closed in the front, since they all have that weird strip of fabric that attaches the skirt to the bodice and covers the closure. I seriously considered whether or not I wanted to add the strip to mine as well, since I have seen other cosplayers do it with great success, but ultimately decided that I was going for movie accuracy with historical patterns. There is clearly a center front line and not anything that could be construed as a strip of fabric. So I decided to hand sew a hook and eye closure, as it's the only one I could think of that would not be visible on the outside. Of course, only after completing it did I find a picture that clearly shows the Tsarina gown's lace in the front. Finally, this bodice just needs the pink neckline. I'm going to cut out a bias strip with my pink fabric. I willy-nilly chose 3 inches simply because that's the width of the ruler I was using. I ironed it in half and ironed each side in half again. Then I sewed it on the fashion side of the bodice. And off camera folded it and hand sewed it to the lining of the bodice. But wait, there's more! I almost forgot that she needs a blue sash. Luckily, I just so happen to have this pretty blue fabric in my stash. Unluckily, it's slightly less fabric than I would have preferred. I have sewn together my little sash. It's not that well done. I currently have it fray check on it just because this is a very fraying fabric. I intend to take it over to the ironing board and then turn it around and give it a little rolled hem, which I will be covering with a gold ribbon. I had originally planned on doing something more, like making a bag lining, because I had seen several other sashes do that, but a lot of them look cheap for one, and for two, I don't have enough of the fabric that I was going to use to make the sash and the front of the skirt, and the front of the skirt is way more important than the sash. So I'm going to go and iron this. I'm waiting for it to dry before I do that because I don't want any of the fray check to get on the visible part of the sash. I think a little bit of it already has in a couple of places, and I don't want it to get too bad otherwise. So I put a rolled hem on the sash, and then I was gonna add this ribbon just to hide the sewing lines. Come on, camera, focus on what I want you to do. Just to hide the sewing lines, so instead of seeing the stitching, hold on. The stitching, see what I want you to see? There you go. The stitch lines, you'll see the ribbon. However, on this side, I finished pinning it all in, and it's the last of the ribbon. That little tail that's left over, that's the last of it. So I could go ahead and sew that down and just go get more ribbon. However, I have to go to Joann's to get the more ribbon, and Joann's is about 40 to 45 minutes away, which is gonna take up so much of my time, and I plan to be out that way later on today anyway, so I'm gonna wait to go to Joann's. And I've been told that Joann's does not do a good job of keeping track of their stock in the store on their website. So the website may say that they have 2 of these ribbons, which it does, but that does not mean that they actually have 2 of the ribbons. I don't know why it's not automatically updated, but so I've been told they do not update it as frequently as they should. So I don't want to sew that side in and then have it be, oh, sorry, we don't have any more. So I'm gonna wait to do that, which means I can't work on that project anymore today. I might start working on the cage skirt today. Either the cage skirt, either today or tomorrow. I really want to get started on the cage skirt to try to get the skirt going so I have enough time to do the embroidery, which is going to take a while, and I'm officially down to 1 month to finish this project. I want to have it done by August 28th so I can go to Dragon Con with it, and the embroidery for the bodice took me 1 week for both sides, and the skirt is going to be longer, so I expect it's probably going to take me more than that, which means I really got to get to the point that I can actually make the pattern for it and embroider it. So that's the next step. and promptly decided that I hated the idea of the gold ribbon around the edges and just dropped it. This is for real the last step. I've just got to gather the sash up and sew it to the right shoulder of the bodice. And there we have the Anastasia bodice. You'll have to forgive everything not matching. This skirt is a skirt I've had for the longest time, but I had to have something that gave the kind of idea of what it would look like underneath. Now I am so happy with this bodice. It turned out really pretty. I'm so excited. I love the little swooshy sleeves. They have the kind of flow that they should have based on the movie. There are some issues, of course there always is. One of which you can tell is the fact that it's not staying exactly where it's supposed to. I think it's supposed to sit like here, but I don't know if maybe I made the armhole too tight or what, because it's just not wanting to stay there. The other issue is you can see here mostly, even though I cut this on the bias, the neckline is still wrinkling, which is quite annoying. I don't like the fact that it's wrinkling. I was hoping not to have that. And then this here is the issue that I was trying to fix during the mock-ups, and I thought I had fixed it, but apparently I had not. And for whatever reason, it's kind of sitting crooked on me. I don't know what the reason for that is. If maybe my corset's not on right, like maybe my corset's not centered or what. Then there's the sash. The sash I feel like should really be a lot tighter. It should be like this, but instead it wants to be like this. I think that's fixable. I think if I just steam the sash and kind of wrinkle it like it should be on something that will keep its shape and just kind of put it there and steam it, I think that'll help things. But the main issue that I'm having, which might not be such an issue from far away, but if you look up close, you can see very obviously the closure of this dress. And I'm wearing the corset underneath, so it's not the end of the world to see through the bodice because you can just see the corset underneath. But I don't like the look of all of these peeking through. So I'm gonna have to look up how to maybe make it so that those aren't able to lean out like that, because it should really be butting up like that. Maybe if I can look that up so that it'll be closer together, it'll look a lot nicer. But overall, I'm really happy with it. I even had to get all dressed up with the jewelry. Of course, this is not the crown that I'm gonna end with, but it was just something that I had in my possession. So if you like this video and you wanna see what it looks like all finally put together in the end, the skirts and everything that I have not made yet, even though it's the middle of August and I'm supposed to be making this for DragonCon at the end of August, you can go ahead and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, or anything of the like, please put that down below. And if you'd like to visit me on any of my other platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and Patreon, that'll be in the info section down below as well. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye!